2 years ago, Mrs. Izebuwa Kwale retired from active service at the Amadu Bello Teaching Hospital, Zaria. And today, she is a pensioner. Her story is different from the many ones we hear about who have given many years of meritorious service to their various organizations but have been unable to access their pensions. This was because of the implementation of the Pension Reform Act by the government, which had given Mrs. Kwale and many others like her a future to look forward to in retirement.
I've worked in ABU for almost 30 years. I was the laboratory head. I was actually afraid because they will tell you, it takes time, and you will not, you know what it is not to earn salary. But it didn't actually take time. My pension managers were IBTC. So getting to 6 months, they will tell you to start processing. The processing took probably maybe, let's say 2 months or maybe about 2-3 months. They paid me everything that I was due.
20 years ago, right, specifically before 2004, right, there was no contributory pension scheme. There was none in Nigeria. Did we participate, when you look at those who put it together to put, Pension Reform Act 2004 in place? The answer is yes. So as we speak today now, the pension industry in Nigeria, go and check. Even though it has a long way to go, there is still a lot of room for improvement. We are talking about subscribers of about 12 million, but most of the salary earners in Nigeria, they are in the pension industry, right? And a lot of headroom for growth, but the important thing is that that industry represents the largest domestic institutional investors that we've got in Nigeria.
To understand the true origins of the Pension Reform Act, we need to go as far back as 1965 to an idea which came from one man, the late Chief Ernest Shonekan, who decided that private sector participation in policy reforms was the gateway to true economic rebirth and restoration. For Chief Ernest Shonekan, inspired by his participation as a private sector representative in a 1965 international conference that focused on frameworks and modalities for a thriving private sector, the first seeds of a similar summit for Nigeria's economy were sown. With the contributions from two other fellow erudite leaders of thought, who together would later become the founding members, they formed a think tank group in the 1990s which made recommendations to the then military government of General Ibrahim Babangida on policy direction for the nation. And thus, the Nigerian Economic Summit was born, founded in 1993 and held on the 18th and 20th of February that year. It was later incorporated in 1996.
NESG was a child of circumstance. Circumstance in the sense that we had a military regime. The style of management is a unitary, from top down. And at that particular point in time, both the private sector and the public sector all believed in the public management of economic affairs.
And so by the early 1990s, we were dealing with almost complete state capture by military rule. Nigeria was also short out of many global cooperation frameworks, so we were isolated as a state. And the economy was closed. It was in that context that a group of concerned business professionals and industry leaders got together and started to discuss a need to engage the government of the day on the future of the economy.
As technology, economic growth, multiculturalism, globalization, and IT began to advance across the world, and nations began to consolidate economic and political power, the NESG realized that Nigeria could not afford to be left behind. And so, on the 30th of September 1997, Nigeria's Vision 2010 Committee, chaired by the former head of the nation's interim government, Chief Ernest Shonekan, presented its report to the then head of state, General Sani Abacha.
The NEASG pioneered the concept of visioning. And back in 95, within our first 3 years, I think we had Vision 2010.
During this phase, the Nigerian Economic Summit, NES, made notable impact by establishing global benchmarking discipline as the premise for national economic scorecard measurements, reviews, and assessments. This was part of the efforts to set the agenda for the modern Nigerian economy. This era, the early opening up phase of the economy, heralded commercialization, liberalization, and privatization policy reforms.
See, NESG's, should I say the philosophy or the concepts we adopted universally also influenced subsequent regulations and legislation. But they did so in a manner that was almost difficult to discern. I give an example. There are several laws that came out: Pension Reform Act, Central Bank Autonomy. Some of the principles that governed these statutes were laid down, at least in discussions of past economic summits.
Deregulation, opening up our country, and bringing a more understanding between the public and private sector became the hallmark. And most of the institutions you see today, EFCC, ICPC, Nigerian Regulatory Due Process Offices, these things, most of them were instituted because of our recommendation. If you go back,
you have to go and queue at NITEL if you want to make international calls. Now you can do from the convenience of your home, anywhere. That's opening up. So that private-public partnership enabled it because we forced governments to privatize NITEL, and a new telephony system emerged.
The Nigerian Economic Summit drove reform legislations in key reforming sectors like power sector, with the National Electric Power Authority, NEPA, renamed Power Holding Company of Nigeria, PHCN, and broken up into 18 companies that involved the private sector in the generation, transmission, and distribution of electricity. 2. The creation of the Ministry of Communication Technology. 3. The strategic concession, commercialization, and privatization of Nigeria's seaports, amongst other sector reforms.
People are sitting in Nigeria Investment Promotion Council today, which was conceived as a one-stop shop for investors in Nigeria. That was not only the NESG proposal or recommendation. The NESG actually set up the committee that drafted the legislation, and I was a member of that committee, what you have as today's Nigeria Investment Promotion Act. It's verbatim, a draft from NESG.
We have done Vision 2010. Yes. Then, because of the transition of the president, there was a discontinuation. It was in 2010 when Mr. Jonathan was now in office that focus on rebutting the vision and creating a longer-term vision for 2020 got greater attraction.
As the Vision 2020 ended in 2020, we supported the government in creating a new Vision 2050 agenda and a medium-term development plan 2021 to 2025. So NESG has played an important role in catalyzing the ideas that inform our agenda, and by holding a scorecard up to show where we are.
As it marks its 30th year anniversary, the Nigerian Economic Summit will continue to push the boundaries of impact-driven, evidence-based policy reforms and implementation across all the sectors, establishing clear reform priorities for the Nigerian economy. And with the help of dedicated, patriotic, private and public sector professionals, its vision of becoming Africa's leading private sector think tank, committed to the development of a modern, globally competitive, and inclusive Nigerian economy, is beginning to align with the desires of every Nigerian for a better, fulfilling, productive, and prosperous life now and in the future.